Good morning, grade 7s, and welcome back to WorksheetCloud and your English lesson. My name is Mrs. Fauger, and if you have any questions about today's lesson, you can email me. The email is on the screen, grade7 at worksheetcloud.com. So we are carrying on with our Michael Murgo novel. We're looking at Warhorse, and so you need to go find a comfy spot to sit. Grab that cup of coffee. I don't mind if you are just going to laze around. You can close your eyes and just listen to the story as we read. We ended off on chapter 7, where Trooper Warren just said, "Do me proud, Joey, do me proud." So that's where we're ending off. So let's look at chapter 8. For just a few short moments, we moved forward at the trot as we had done in training. In the eerie silence of no man's land, all that could be heard was the jingle of the harness and the snorting of the horses. We picked our way around the craters, keeping our line as best we could. Up ahead of us, at the top of a gentle sloping hill, were the battered remnants of a wood, and just below, a hideous rusting roll of barbed wire that stretched out along the horizon as far as the eye could see. "Wire," I heard Trooper Warren whisper through his teeth. "Oh God, Joey, they said the wire would be gone. They said the guns would deal with the wire. Oh my goodness." We were into a canter now, and still there were no sound nor sight of any enemy. The troopers were shouting at an invisible foe, leaning over their horses' necks, their sabres stretched out in front of them. I galvanized myself into a gallop to keep with Topthorn, and as I did, so the first terrible shells fell amongst us, and the machine guns opened up. The bedlam of battle had begun. All around me men cried and fell to the ground, and horses reared and screamed in an agony of fear and pain. The ground erupted on either side of me, throwing horses and riders clear into the air. The shells whined and roared overhead, and every explosion seemed like an earthquake to us. Some lovely descriptions there. But the squadron galloped on inexorably through it all towards the wire at the top of the hill, and I went with him. On my back, Trooper Warren held me in an iron grip with his knees. I stumbled once and felt him lose a stirrup, and slowed so that he could find it again. Topthorn was still ahead of me, his head up, his tail whisking from side to side. I found more strength in my legs and charged after him. Trooper Warren prayed aloud as he rode, but his prayers turned soon to curses, and as he saw the carnage around him. Only a few horses reached the wire, and Topthorn and I were amongst them. There were indeed a few holes blasted through the wire by our bombardment, so that some of us could find a way through, and we came at last upon the first line of enemy trenches, but they were empty. The firing came now from higher up in amongst the trees, and so the squadron, or what was left of it, regrouped and galloped up into the wood, only to be met by a line of hidden wire in amongst the trees. Some of the horses ran into the wire before they could be stopped, and stuck there, their riders trying feverishly to extract them. I saw one trooper dismount deliberately once he saw his horse was caught. He pulled out his rifle and shot his mount before falling dead himself on the wire. I could see at once that there was no way through, that the only way was to jump the wire, and when I saw Topthorn and Captain Stewart leap over where the wire was lowest, I followed them, and we found ourselves at last in amongst the enemy. From behind every tree, from trenches all around, it seemed, they ran forward in their piked helmets to counterattack. They rushed past us, ignoring us, until we found ourselves surrounded by an entire company of soldiers, their rifles pointing up at us. The crump of the shelling and the spitting of rifle fire had suddenly stopped. I looked around me for the rest of the squadron to discover that we were alone. Behind us, the riderless horses, all that was left of a proud cavalry squadron, galloped backwards towards our trenches, and the hillside below was strewn with the dead and dying. "Throw down your sword, trooper," said Captain Stewart, bending in his saddle and dropping his sword to the ground. "There's been enough useless slaughter today." no sense in adding to it. He walked Topthorn closer towards us and reined in. Trooper, I told you once we had the best horses, and today they showed us they are the best horses in the entire regiment, in the whole confounded army, and there's not a scratch on them. He dismounted as the German soldiers closed in, and Trooper Warren followed suit. They stood side by side, holding our reins while we were surrounded. We looked back down the hill at the battlefield. A few horses were still struggling on the wire, but one by one they were put out of their misery by the advancing German infantry, who had already regained their line of trenches. They were the last shots in the battle. What a waste, the captain said. What a ghastly waste. Maybe now when they see this they'll understand that you can't send horses into wire and machine guns. Maybe now they'll think again. The soldiers around us seemed wary of us and kept their distance. They seemed not to know quite what to do with us. The horses, sir? Trooper Warren asked. Joey and Topthorn? What happens to them now? Same as us, Trooper, said Captain Stewart. They're prisoners of war, just as we are. Flanked by the soldiers who hardly spoke, we were escorted over the brow of a hill and down into the valley below. Here the valley was still green, for there had been no battle over this ground as yet. All the while, Trooper Warren had his arm over my neck to reassure me, and I felt then that he was beginning to say goodbye. He spoke softly into my ear. Don't suppose they'll let you come with me where I'm going, Joey. I wish they could, but they can't. But I shan't ever forget you. I promise you that. Don't you worry, Trooper, Captain Stewart said. The Germans love their horses every bit as much as we do. They'll be all right. Anyway, Topthorn will look after your Joey. You can be sure of that. As we came out of the wood and onto the road below, we were halted by our escort. Captain Stewart and Trooper Warren were marched away down the road towards a cluster of ruined buildings that must at one time have been a village, while Topthorn and I were led away across the fields and further down the valley. There was no time for long farewells, just a brief last stroke of the muzzle for each of us, and they were gone. As they walked away, Captain Stewart had his arm around Trooper Warren's shoulder. Chapter 9. We were led away by two nervous soldiers down farm tracks, through orchards and across a bridge before being tied up beside a hospital tent some miles from where we had been captured. A knot of wounded soldiers gathered around us at once. They patted and stroked us, and I began to whisk my tail with impatience. I was hungry and thirsty and angry that I had been separated from my Trooper Warren. Still no one seemed to know quite what to do with us, until an officer in a long grey coat with a bandage round his head emerged from the tent. He was an immensely tall man, standing a full head higher than anyone around him. The manner of his gait and the way he held himself indicated a man clearly accustomed to wielding authority. A bandage came down over one eye, so that he had only half a face visible. As he walked towards us, I saw that he was limping, that one foot was heavily bandaged, and that he needed the support of a stick. The soldier sprang back at his approach and stood stiffly to attention. He looked us both over in undisguised admiration, shaking his head and sighing as he did so. Then he turned to the men. There are hundreds like these dead out on our wire. I tell you, if we had had one jot of the courage of these animals, we should be in Paris by now, and not slugging it out here in the mud. These two horses came through hellfire to get here. They were the only two to make it. It was not their fault. They were sent on fool's errands. They are not circus animals. They are heroes. Do you understand? Heroes. And they should be treated as such. And you stand around and gawp at them? You are none of you badly wounded, and the doctor is far too busy to see you at present. So I want these horses unsaddled, rubbed down, fed and watered at once. They will need oats and hay, and a blanket for each of them. Now get moving. The soldiers hurried away, scattering in all directions, and within a few minutes Topthorn and I were being lavished with all manner of clumsy kindness. None of them had handled a horse before, it seemed, but that did not matter to us, So grateful were we for all the fodder they had brought us and the water. We lacked for nothing that morning, and all the time the tall officer supervised from under the trees, leaning on his stick. From time to time he would come up to us and run his hand along our backs and over our quarters, nodding his approval and lecturing his men on the finer points of horse breeding as he examined us. After a time he was joined by a man in a white coat who emerged from the tent, his hair dishevelled, his face pale with exhaustion. There was blood on his coat. "Headquarters phoned through about the horses, Herr Hauptmann," said the man in white, "and they say I am to keep them for the stretcher cases. I know your views on the matter, but I'm afraid you cannot have them. We need them here desperately, and the way things are going, I fear we will need more. That was just the first attack. There will be more to come. We expect a sustained offensive. It will be a long battle." We are the same on both sides. Once we start something, we seem to have to prove a point, and that takes time and lives. We'll need all the ambulance transport we can get, motorized or horse. The tall officer drew himself up to his full height and bristled with indignation. He was a formidable sight as he advanced on the man in white. "Doctor, you cannot put fine British cavalry horses to pulling carts. Any of our horse regiments, my own regiment of lancers indeed, would be proud, indeed overwhelmed, to have such splendid creatures in their ranks. You cannot do it, doctor. I will not permit it." "Herr Hauptmann," said the doctor impatiently. He was clearly not at all intimidated. "Do you really imagine that after this morning's madness, either side will be using cavalry again in this war? Can you not understand that we need transport, Herr? And we need it now. There are men, brave men, German and English, lying out there on stretchers in the trenches, and at present there's not enough transport to bring them back to the hospital here. Now, do you want them all to die, Herr? Tell me that. Do you want them to die? If these horses could be hitched up to a cart, they could bring them back in the dozens. Come on. We just do not have enough ambulances to cope, and what we do have break down or get stuck in the mud. Please, Herr, we need your help." "The world," said the German officer, shaking his head, "the world has gone quite mad. When noble creatures such as these are forced to become beasts of burden, the world has gone mad. But I can see that you are right. I am a lancer, Herr Doctor, but even I know that men are more important than horses. But you must see to it that you have someone in charge of these two, who know horses. I don't want any dirty-fingered mechanic getting his hands on these two, and you must tell them that they are riding horses. They won't take kindly to pulling carts, no matter how noble the cause." "Thank you, Herr," said the doctor. "You are most kind, but I have a problem. As I'm sure you will agree, they will need an expert to manage them to start with, particularly if they have never been put in a cart before. The problem is that I have only medical orderlies here. True, one of them has worked horses on a farm before the war, but to tell you the truth, Herr, I have no one who could manage these two. No one. That is, except you. You are due to go to base hospital on the next convoy of ambulances, but they won't be here before this evening. I know it's a lot to ask of a wounded man, but you can see how desperate I am. The farmer down below has several carts, and I should imagine that all the harness you would need. What do you say, Herr? Can you help me?" The bandaged officer limped back towards us and stroked our noses tenderly. Then he smiled and nodded. "Very well. It's sacrilege, Doctor, a sacrilege," he said. "But if it's got to be done, then I'd rather do it myself and see it done properly." So that the same afternoon after our capture, Topthorne and I were hitched up side by side to an old hay cart, and with the officer directing two orderlies, we were driven up through the woods back towards the thunder of the gunfire and the wounded that awaited us. Topthorne was all the time in a great state of alarm, for it was clear he had never pulled before in his life, and at last I was able in my turn to help him, to lead, to compensate, and to reassure. The officer led us at first, limping along beside me with his stick, but he was soon confident enough to mount the cart with the two orderlies and take the reins. "You've done a bit of this before, my friend," he said. "I can tell that. I always knew the British were mad. Now I know that they use horses such as you as cart horses. I'm quite sure of it. That's what this war is all about, my friend. It's about which of us is the madder. And clearly you British started with an advantage. You were mad beforehand. All that afternoon and evening, while the battle raged, we trudged up to the lines, loaded up with the stretcher cases, and brought them back to the field hospital. It was several miles each way over roads and tracks, filled with shell holes and littered with the corpses of mules and men. The artillery barrage from both sides was continuous. It roared overhead all day as the armies hurled their men at each other across no man's land. And the wounded that could walk poured back along the roads. I had seen the same grey faces looking out from under their helmets somewhere before. All that was different were the uniforms. They were grey now, with red piping, and the helmets were no longer round with a broad brim. It was almost night before the officer left us, waving goodbye to us and to the doctor from the back of the ambulance as it bumped its way across the field and out of sight. The doctor turned to the orderlies who had been with us all day. See to it that they are well cared for, those two, he said. They saved good lives today, those two, good German lives and good English lives. They deserve the best of care. See to it that they have it. For the first time that night since we came to the war, Topthorne and I had the luxury of a stable. The shed in the farm that lay across the fields from the hospital was emptied of pigs and poultry, and we were led into a fine rack brimming full with sweet hay and buckets of soothing cold water. That night, after we had finished our hay, Topthorne and I were lying down together at the back of the shed. I was half awake and could think only of my aching muscles and sore feet. Suddenly the door creaked open, and the stable filled with a flickering orange light. Behind the light there were footsteps. We looked up, and I was seized at that moment with a kind of panic. For a fleeting moment I imagined myself back at home in the stable with old Zoe. The dancing light triggered off an alarm in me, reminding me at once of Albert's father. I was on my feet in an instant, and backing away from the light with Topthorne beside me, protecting me. However, when the voice spoke, it was not the raspy, drunken voice of Albert's father, but rather a soft, gentle tone of a girl's voice, a young voice. I could see now that there were two people behind the light, an old man, a bent old man in rough clothes and clogs, and beside him stood a young girl, her head and shoulders wrapped in a shawl. "There you are, Grandpapa," she said. "I told you they put them in here. Have you ever seen anything so beautiful? Oh, can they be mine, Grandpapa? Please, can they be mine?" Right, so what a lovely way to end, guys. We have got a few more chapters to go, so we will start at chapter 10 next lesson. Thank you so much for joining me. Remember, you can email me at grade7@worksheetcloud.com, and then there will be an activity once you close the video. So I do hope that you will have a wonderful day, and I will see you same time, same place. Bye, guys.